everyone. I just wanted to drop in and do a little impromptu, shorty mini podcast. I've been thinking a lot about these upcoming years, this pivotal point in humanity's consciousness shift. And what's really interesting as you tune into this idea of Neptune and Saturn coming into a conjunction in February of 2026 in Aries, it's a really interesting time because it feels like a lot of what we thought would never crystallize will suddenly crystallize, and a lot of what we thought was solid will start to dissolve. And because it's Aries, it's the beginning of an era. Saturn is structure, and Neptune is the ephemeral. And when what is realized or limitations are starting to dissolve, and what is ephemeral is starting to crystallize in a new cycle, in an Aries cycle, it is like a collective rebirth of the spirit. And I've been thinking a lot about some of the themes that we might be feeling in less esoteric and sort of more practical embodied terms. And I think that a lot of us are going to be going through identity crises because the way our creativity works is shifting. What we thought worked for us, what we're excited by, might start to feel less exciting or uncharged. And a lot of what we had patience for, we will no longer have patience for. And as we change our identities, it changes our creativity, but it also changes our relationships because everything is always connected. I think this is a time when we're really starting to understand that the binary thinking of focusing on the individual or focusing on the collective is outdated, that it is not really a reflection of reality because we are very much fractals of the divine, meaning we are individuated and connected at the same time. Think about how whenever you break down a molecule of a substance, you can break down all the components and they have individuated ways of being looked at, but at the end, they are still part of the whole. So seeing the whole, the connective, is not a threat to the individual, and seeing the individual for what it is, or as sovereign or separate, is not a threat to the whole. This is the kind of way we are moving because we're coming into this age of Aquarius. Aquarius is this sign that stands for the collective and the humanitarian, but also the rebel and the individual. And with Pluto and Aquarius, both are being rebirthed. Our concept of what it means to be a humanitarian, our concept of what it means to be a rebel, those are all being rebirthed. And in a way, I think that Uranus and Gemini, Uranus just ingress into Gemini on 7/7, is trying to teach us how to break out of dualities that don't serve us and see from a plane we have never seen from before, and to therefore relate to what we once thought of as polarized or opposite from a different, higher perspective. And by higher, I just mean farther away vantage point where we can see the bigger picture. Along with this comes a dissolution of illusion and hierarchy. And a lot of the times when we're working in constructs of reality where there is hierarchy or a pyramid power over structure, we think of those who are special, or think of those who are stars, or think of those who have a lot of, quote, light. And we try to stand in that light to get some of that light cast on us. So we almost project our divinity onto other people or project our power onto other people. And we try to be seen by or belong to whoever we perceive owns that energy or has access to that frequency. And we're in an era of realizing that that was never real, that who we thought was in power was always just a metaphysical representation of something in our belief system as a collective that needs to be dealt with or needs to be witnessed or needed to be played out. And I know that this is extremely triggering in times where there's like such egregious abuses of power going on in our systems, especially in Cancer season, where the United States is a very Cancerian nation. There's all of this defense of home. all this idea about security, all this kind of feeling of me and mine. And it's interesting because when we look at the nature of the sign of Cancer, it's really about the womb. It's really about mothering. But when we have a nation that's very divorced in its imagination from the land because it's stolen land, so we have taken something from people who feel a deep Cancerian, a deep womb connection, and then are trying to defend and stand on this land without that connection to nature baked into the fabric of our identity because we severed that connection when we decided to extract from the land and hurt the people who held the wisdom to teach us how to really connect to nature and land with reverence. And it's not that we need to be indigenous to have that connection, but it is that we need to reckon with the past or reckon with living on a construct or benefiting from the harm of people who carry that frequency of deep earth reverence. We need to reckon with that. We need to reckon with it in our own ancestries. We need to reckon with it in the places we live in now. And I think that a lot of times what is played out is this feeling of being separated from God or separated from nature. And whatever we see as being the ultimate source of power, when we separate, when we believe that we're separate from it, we will project a figurehead to represent that thing. So there's this organized religion, or maybe they're cult leaders, or people that you perceive as the saints and people you perceive as the sinners. That kind of duality and that kind of linear good and bad, right and wrong thinking is breaking because it doesn't work. It relies on us disowning aspects of ourselves. It relies on us trying to flatten the complexity that lives in our lineages, that lives in our energetic makeup, that lives in our souls, because who knows the origins of our souls and everything that they have been through. And if all time is happening at once, we're kind of experiencing the past and the future all together. So there's so much unknown in the vastness of who we are, so much our mind will never grasp. But something that I've noticed is that as our relationship change, as we start to become more and more centered on our hearts, what is inauthentic is going to become intolerable. People trying to present themselves a certain way. Anytime we're trying to imitate somebody instead of work with our own magic, our own knowing, it will be glaringly obvious in the upcoming years, and especially in the upcoming 6 to 8 months. Where we lie to ourselves, we will be shown with more clarity. What we ignore, we will be shown with more clarity. And it's not a punishment, it's a compassion of the universe to show us what we need to see. But then are we going to take the actions to change our behaviors? Are we going to understand what we have power to change and what we don't? And something that I've noticed is that we have grown up in a system and a culture of so much reactivity because there's so much emotional manipulation. We are manipulated by the media that we watch. Think about when you're watching shows and it's just this escalating agitation on your nervous system. There's the information people are sharing, and then there's the emotional projection that you're receiving. And the more and more that we are in touch with our own sensitivity and our own energetic skills, the more we'll be able to spot these things and transmute them or unlatch from them. But the way that we have been raised encourages us to be emotionally reactive. It encourages us to project onto other people. I've spoken about this at length. Think about celebrity culture and the way we project good on evil onto chosen select people. That's why you see this rapid rise and then rapid cut down of people. That's the way we treat aspects of ourselves. That's the way we treat each other in our day-to-day lives. We can't always see the complexity. And that's because the mind is fighting for certainty, and it will flatten truth in order to feel certain, because we're taught that safety equals certainty and certainty equals safety. When in actuality, if you look at the whole history of science, If you look at your life as you know it in your experience, there's nobody I have ever met who has not experienced surprise, change, or things they could never have predicted, both, quote, good and bad. Certainty has always been a kind of lie. And so, what are we clinging to? We're clinging to mind's control of things. We're clinging to what our mind thinks would be better. And when you think about that, that sort of cerebral control that doesn't really exist so much in the holistic way that plants and animals steward intelligence. Their bodies and minds, and I can't speak for their spirits or emotions, but I imagine also their spirits and emotions are coherently moving. And it is through merging with the field of oneness, the field of belonging, that empowers them, like in Star Wars, to move with life instead of trying to coerce and control life, both within and without. And so we are learning as a population that these narratives of good and evil, that they have always been the mind's way of creating control where there never was control. And through that mental control, we can justify things that don't make sense. We justify extraction. We justify copying someone else's idea. We justify treating ourselves poorly and treating other people poorly. We justify neglecting aspects of our health or the planet's health or our community's health. And this is understandable because we're living in a construct that also treats us as a foundational truth that we are not enough, that what we have is not enough, that we will never be enough. So there's this constant aspiration and focus on what we don't have. There's this constant distraction away from what we already do have. And in every arena and every direction, we are faced with this manipulation. So what can we do as people? Well, I think it comes down to trying to understand when you are trying to outsource your divinity. And through divinity, we're talking about authority, we're talking about power, we're talking about genius, we're talking about art, we're talking about ability to shine, we're talking about specialness. We reject in us what we find unacceptable, and we reject in us what we have been taught we don't deserve. So we both reject our shadowy nature, and we also reject our divine light in nature. And so it's almost like we're becoming and have become complicit in our own soul loss. Like we say, yes, let's give our soul away and project that part of us onto someone else instead of own it and learn how to work with it. And I have been cultivating a lot of different practices, thoughts, and understandings that are about holding ourselves in a space of transformation. 2025, as many of you have learned, from all of the amazing astrologers out there, is this year of transformation. And transformation is not something that's about, oh, here's the goal that I'm going to achieve and move towards that goal, and I'm going to be this kind of person. There's this part of it that is about dissolution and surrender. And in the particular part of transformation the human collective is in, it's a lot about the mind losing control, quote, losing our minds. Which is why we need to learn to work with other forms of intelligence, nervous system intelligence, animal instinct, creative instinct, intuition, energetic understanding. When you are being overly strategic, you are thinking as the left brain, which has tried to colonize the right brain. That is the words of Ian McGilchrist, a really amazing psychiatrist who has studied the brain and the way that the left brains take over the right brain, mimics our history. And there's so many new emerging thoughts coming out from Veda Austin and the study of water. There are so many people studying light from quantum biology with Catherine Clinton that are starting to converge and show us that there are ways that our newest forms of science and our most ancient forms of wisdom and indigenous forms of cosmology, that there are places where these all converge. And I talk about that a lot because it allows you to look at facts instead of looking at clumps of categories, which almost act like smoke and mirrors. For example, there are a lot of thoughts that I have looked into that would be put under the category of New Age thinking. But I see these same threads of thoughts in communities of people where there are indigenous ways of knowing. And a lot of what I do is untangle the smoke and mirrors and pull out the individual threads and present them to you so you can make up your own mind or ideas about how that makes sense to you. I am detangling the smoke and mirrors and handing you the information wiped clean of all the charge, wiped clean of all the tribalism, and handing it to you for you to make sense of. And that's what I do primarily in my offering, Create Your Cosmology, which is all about reclaiming your ways of knowing, about undoing ways of knowing that were never yours, about becoming clear and authentic about your truth and what is true and the nature of truth. And then the course that I have, or the offering I have coming up, Chrysalis Codes, is the precursor. It fertilizes your imagination, and it's all about understanding transformation, both as something you actively participate in and also surrender into. And when you are in transformation, being in a community that is held is so important. It removes so much unnecessary pain so that the tension and pain that exists in transformation can be held and you can soothe yourself through it. Rather than prolonging pain, it allows you to hold yourself through the parts that are necessarily uncomfortable and release the parts that don't have to be as. In my life, I have come into a completely different reality. If you met me in my later 20s, I was so depressed and having a really difficult time. I was self-medicating with alcohol because of my sensitivity, my high sensitivity and my social anxiety. I was battling an addiction to work that has taken me until this year to really, really undo a legacy of work addiction as a coping mechanism. And I have turned my life into a reality where I actually get to be who I am for a living. Not only that, but I can live into my mystery, live into my values, and live into my intellectual pursuits all at the same time. I've created a life where I'm a coherent being and life is still supporting me, which I was taught you couldn't do. I was taught you had to choose. And so I lay that all out for you in all of my offerings. It's kind of like cutting a path through a dark wood and handing someone else the maps and showing them all the path that you've cut for them so they can walk their own path with a lot less difficulty and with a lantern and with a map of their own symbols, which they can add to, right? Because I'm not here to have you replicate my experience. I'm here to show you and remind you that we're all in a collective experience, but that we navigate it as individuals. So Chrysalis Codes is an offering that is going to be my summer offering. It is going to be open until July 15th. It consists of 4 workshops, each of which have 3 to 4 weekly practices and 3 live meetings where we can unpack and connect and integrate everything we've learned. So that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in, and take a great day. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. The music you are listening to is by Kristen Sontag, also known as Sunday Diamond NYC on Instagram. Check out the album there. And I hope to see you for Chrysalis Codes. It will be open through July 15th. All the details are in the show notes. Take care, gardeners.